This is Export Like a Boss, the podcast for those on the front lines of international business and trade. Succeed in business on a global scale. The planet is your market. Here is your host, Alberto Rodriguez Baez.
Welcome to a new episode of Export Like a Boss. Today we are honored to feature Concord Supply. Concord Supply was founded in 1991 and is located in San Antonio, Texas. Concord is a manufacturer of packaging materials, special laminations, and extrusions. You can see their products on their website at concordsupply.com. Concord Supply is a true American dream story. Victor and Liliana Quiñones, the company's founders and owners, started this company with less than $10. Today, Concord's products are exported all over the world and are used in metal and wood packaging, construction, and agriculture. The company's achievements are too many to mention in a few minutes, so I highly recommend you to visit the episode's notes on our website, exportlikeaboss.com, and check the links to Concord's news link and the success story written by UTSA's International Trade Center. On to the show. Our guests on today's episode are Victor Quiñones, Concord Supply owner and president, and Vic Quiñones, sales manager. Enjoy the show. Victor and Vic, thank you very much for taking the time for this interview.
You're welcome.
Thank you for having us.
How and when did you start Concord Supply?
It was in 1991, and we've been in business since then.
Great. And how many people work for your company?
Here, about 38, but in total, around the world, about 200.
What is the product that you manufacture?
We manufacture a cover for steel, which it contains a anti-corrosive inhibitor, and that protects the steel from going back to its original stage, which is iron ore. So in other words, what we do is we make a product that acts like anode of sacrifice. So instead of the steel corrodes, the BCI, which is the corrosion inhibitor, is the one that corrodes. So the steel can go over sea shipments.
I would actually just like to add a little bit there. It is true we manufacture anti-corrosive packaging materials for the steel industry, and that is a big part of our day-to-day. However, given the fact that we have moved to a manufacturing supplier of the steel industry, we've seen that there's other areas of opportunity as well in construction, just to name one, and agriculture, and different kinds of engineered poly-coated products. We noticed whenever we began manufacturing our own products in-house that we were capable of doing so much more with the equipment that we have. So Concord, although it's very relatively new in the manufacturing space, we're actively seeking out new opportunities outside of steel. We really want to try to take advantage of what we have now and offer the same valuable products and capabilities to other industries as well.
Vic, you were earlier mentioning a couple of amazing stories. One about how Concord started, and that's one of the most amazing American dream stories I've heard. And I would like, if you don't mind, to share it with our listeners. And also, when you started producing these special wrapping for coils, what was one of the issues that you had and how you solved that issue of the material not being accepted at the beginning?
I would love to answer that, and thank you for that. That is a big reason why I enjoy working here with my family. I do believe that Concord is a wonderful example of what the American dream is, especially in these trying times. It's important for us to remember that this is the land of opportunity, and it's just there for us to reach out and take advantage of the opportunities that are presented in front of us. I think that Concord's history goes in line with that very well, and I'd like to explain a little bit. Concord, like my father mentioned, began in 1991. At the time, there was an opportunity there. He recognized that the anti-corrosive packaging that was being used in the steel industry was not as effective as it could have been. There were areas of opportunity there that my father, being innovative and a visionary person that he is, was able to identify those and seek out ways to improve upon what they've been using before. Earlier, Alberto, you and I were speaking, and we were talking a little bit about what drives change. And in the steel industry, back in the early 90s, they were using a product that nowadays is considered substandard, but at the time was an industry norm. And without going into too much detail, it was a paper-based product that they were wrapping their steel coils with. And at the time, they had a certain level of tolerance for scrap that they just assumed was inevitable. So as they're packaging their product, which is steel coils, they would ship them to the customer, and very often it would arrive with a certain amount of corrosion, which would then be removed from the coil, and whatever was left was considered billable product. The rest was just scrap. And what we were talking about earlier is that the reason it's tolerated is because that's what they were accustomed to up until that point. However, my father at the time, he said, he looked at the product and he said, well, why don't we switch over to a all plastic or all poly based material? Because the properties of craft paper, which is the kind of paper that they were using, the material absorbs humidity out of the ambient air, and that packaging introduces that moisture to the surface of the coil. It's counterintuitive for your packaging, which you're using to protect from moisture, to instead of protect your steel, would actually introduce moisture to the steel and cause a certain amount of surface corrosion. So when my father saw that, he said, well, why don't we develop a product that will have greater tear resistance properties, which are important for steel, but also far improve the amount of moisture that's tolerated to be introduced to the packaging. So he said, well, let's go away from paper and let's start using plastic. It sounds simple, and nowadays you and I might laugh and we might say, well, of course. But at the time, it was unheard of. And so he got together with some manufacturers. He developed this idea, and which eventually became a prototype, which he then took to these companies and introduced the material. And right away, the response from them was, oh, no. We've been using this material for 30 plus years. It works. It's cheap, and I'm happy with it. So I'm not interested in changing anything. And we said, okay, well, it didn't matter how much we tried to convince them of all of these additional benefits to this idea that my father had. They wouldn't have it. So we went back to the drawing board and we said, what can we do to cross this barrier? So what he did is he actually made the plastic the same color and the same texture as the paper that they had been using up until that point, and went back to them and said, well, I know you didn't like the plastic, but will you try this? And they felt it, and they had an opportunity to examine the material, and they said, you know what, I will try this. I'll try it. And they did that because at that point we had crossed a mental concept for them. They said, hey, this isn't plastic. This is like the paper I'm using now. So they gave it a shot, and they were amazed. They said, this stuff works. It's wonderful. Let's get some more. And that's how Concord began. We took advantage of this opportunity that we saw, that my father saw, and we ran with it. When you catch on to a good idea and you finally are able to cross that threshold of people telling you no, and they finally say, okay, let's try it, you got to take advantage of that, and you got to run with it. So that's what we did. We began distributing the material, and this is back in the early 90s, early 2000s. We would distribute the material to them. We would get with manufacturers, and at the time it was not something that was normal. So we developed this industry, and now it's a multi-million-dollar industry that exists in the steel industry. It's very rare to find paper nowadays, and that's really how Concord began. We didn't take no for an answer.
Thank you very much, Vic. And that's an amazing story. That story should be in business textbooks because it shows how to adapt to a hurdle in an industry and how to create an actual new industry. So that was an amazing story. Thank you very much, Vic. And Victor, I would like to ask you, when did you start selling abroad?
About 25 years ago. The reason I started business here in US is because at that time it was very territorial. It's not like now that the business is a worldwide business. So my natural language is obviously Spanish, and it was easy for me to sell in Mexico, and that's why I started over there. But the thing is that I notice is once you get into a plant or getting into another business, it doesn't matter in what country, you can do more business with them because you're already in. It's a lot easier to do more business with the same company, with different products, and start growing from there. And because these companies are international, they start talking about you in other countries, and that's how you start growing. And one of the good things about this is that the material was very well accepted, and it became an innovation. So people is always curious about innovations. And I find out that the only way and the best way to make any business grow is with innovation. And if you get a patent, you are protected. Right now, we are living in hard times because people is trying to compete by price. In one way, taxes in this country are high, and there is no way you can compete with other countries. The business is international. We cannot be, isolated only in this country to make business. Now the business is international, and that's why the importance of exporting. The only way that we have right now to be able to succeed in exporting is innovation. You change the rules of the game. This last time I'm making a new machine in Mexico. I mean, we're making it here, but we send it to Mexico so they can use my material only on that machine, and it's patented. So what I'm trying to do is to keep buying from us in the United States. So that's the most important part. By price is going to be hard to compete because there's too many countries.
Right. So do you remember when did you start exporting to other countries besides Mexico?
Well, it was 25 years ago,
Okay.
and then it started growing immediately to other countries. And to be honest with you, it was very hard to me to sell in the United States at the beginning. Culture is different. Let's put it this way, jokes that can be said in Spanish or in Chinese may not be funny for other cultures. So this is a very social business. All the business are social. You have to get along with your customer. You have to be nice, and you have to be accepted by them. If I cannot control or I do not understand fully a language or a culture or a type of living, I can make a mistake. So what I'm doing now with my son Vic, he grows here in the United States and he knows the culture perfectly. And I noticed that when I took him for the first time to the steel mills in US, he was able to penetrate all the way to be invited to the biggest steel mills because he knows the culture here. So if you're going to grow as an international business, you have to have people that are local on certain countries, or you may not be able to succeed.
Excellent advice. Vic?
Just to elaborate a little bit, Mr. Quiñones brought up some good points there, and one of them I think that's important to discuss is, and Alberto, you had asked about the difficulty in penetrating export markets. My father, he mentioned about innovation, and I want to make it clear. Whenever you have, there's a big difference. There's two real types of selling that I see just looking at it from afar. You're either trying to introduce a product and you're trying to sell it to people that maybe aren't aware of it, or once you become established, there are people looking for your product. It's a very different kind of sale. And whenever you have a good product, if you can market it well, if it works well, if it's innovative, and if it saves your customers money, then the product will sell itself. And whether that's here in the US or in Mexico or in China or anywhere else in the world, it's important to remember that ultimately to understand your customer and their desires, what their needs are, to attend those first, you need to make sure that your product touches on all of their necessities. And then of course there is a social aspect, and that is very important, certainly. But it's also important to have faith in your product, to know that it works. And you have to remember, because we are selling a packaging material, they're not just trusting me as a salesperson, but they're trusting my product to protect their product, to protect their brand and their image.
Right.
Whenever you buy steel from them and you receive it wrapped in the product that we make, how is that steel going to look? Is it going to be worth the money? And that's our job. That's our job, is to make sure that whenever their customer, my customer's customer, receives their product, that they're satisfied, and not just satisfied, but impressed with the packaging.
Great. So how many countries are you exporting nowadays?
I would have to say at least 7. It's hard to say, because at any given moment, we may pick up a customer or two here and there. We also work through distributors. A big part of what we do as manufacturers is we sell to distributors all over the world, and those distributors in turn then have the capability of selling all across their regional area. So say for example, I sell a product in Central America. There's a lot of countries that are geographically close in proximity to where one of my distributors in southern Mexico could potentially sell to many other countries.
Mm-hmm. When you started exporting a few years back, what was the most challenging aspect of being a small business starting doing exports?
Well, at the very beginning, we didn't have any treaty with any country, and to export material, it was very hard because everyone was charging duties to let them in. When NAFTA started, it opened the door for us to export, and many people may think that those treaties will affect United States, but at the contrary, it helps everyone, because you can send material which is going to be work in Mexico. Yes, of course, he's gonna give some work to people in Mexico, but when he come back, they're gonna sell it in here and make a profit and make money out of that material. And with the TPP, same thing. We have the honor to have as a visitor Mr. Michael Froman here, Ambassador Michael Froman. He is the one that actually work on the TPP, on these agreements, and it's important for us to keep it open to the world, because this is a worldwide business now. If we decide to encapsulate the business only for US, there's many other countries making business. So they're gonna be doing business between them, and us gonna be out of business very soon.
Switching a little bit to the marketing and international business development, let me ask you, how do you find your first clients abroad? Did they find you through word of mouth? And how are they finding you now? Or are you currently conducting international marketing campaigns?
What we're looking for is not trying to sell a product, it's trying to sell a solution. So we investigate on what problems certain companies have, and I have at that time a friend working for the largest steel mill in Mexico, and talking to him occasionally, he mentioned that they had corrosion problems, 30 to 35% corrosion problems, that it was normal, but he was kind of concerned. He says, is there a way that we can make it better? And I start I said, you know what? Because I like innovation, let me check on the market. What is it I can find? And I was able to find a chemical that it was a reactive, galvanizing the material that they were making, which is steel. So what I did is, okay, if I can get this corrosion inhibitor in the powder and I can put it in my material, at least I will have an anode of sacrifice. Like on the boilers, if you see a plate which it turns green, that's the anode of sacrifice. So the galvanizing is not corroding because of that little plate. So I did exactly the same, but with certain chemicals that I come out with that I find, and I put it together with the package, and it worked fine. So actually, what we do is, okay, investigate what needs or what problems the industry have, and what is it you can do to come out with an idea. And once you fix the idea, they'll buy it. Easy.
About the marketing, I guess the best way to answer you is that Rust speaks every language. So whenever you have a product that works well, word of mouth runs around, and and obviously word of mouth is a big sell, because it's not me selling the product, but rather it's maybe a colleague or perhaps a competitor. If you run across your competitor and you see that they're bringing in an innovative packaging solution that's saving them money, and that you're being left behind, sometimes competitors force you to improve the way that you do things, which isn't always a bad thing. Sometimes there's a lot of value in that. Initially, word of mouth, cold calls, good old-fashioned cold calls, and expos are very important to us. Networking is certainly one of the most important things. And I was actually just commenting to some of your colleagues there how important it is whenever you have an opportunity, whether that opportunity presents itself at school or at job functions, how important it is to network and to get to know other people, and to really not sell them on your product, but just to inform them and let them know that this option is there for them. And Alberto, actually working with you has actually helped us tremendously, working with you and MBDA and putting everything together for us. It's really kind of come a long way. So I guess to answer your question, it has to be a mix. It has to be a mix of all of these different avenues. And as we move forward into the future, the internet. I would be remiss not to mention the internet. LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, Google. All of those there are free for companies to take advantage of, and it's just there for you to use. Just like your service and helping us, these are all tools that Concord as a company tries to take advantage of, and that's really what makes the big picture. That is our marketing.
Right now, there are a lot of small business owners and executives in the international business arena that are listening. What will be some of the lessons that you have learned from being a successful exporter and that you can share with our listeners?
First, as a businessman, contacts. I find out that we have a very good relation with Alberto here and the Department of Commerce, and they've been able to help us around the world through the embassies to meet new customers, and we start growing a lot faster that way. So I encourage people to get close to the Department of Commerce and ask for help. They will give you the best avenues and the contacts on their embassies that actually sometimes they go with us from the American embassy with the customers to visit them. Once and the American embassy knock on the door of any country's industry, they open the door. So we find an easy way to get in.
Great. So your recommendation is to use the services and assistance from organizations such as the International Trade Center, the United States Commercial Service, the NVDA, and other government agencies. Is that correct?
That is correct. That's exactly what I mean. I feel a lot of support around the world anytime that I need to even ask the type of government duties, how safe it is to do business with certain countries. I first give them a call.
I have a question about traveling. You have traveled all over the world, visited clients, met with clients in many different countries. What are some of your recommendations for exporters and people that are about to start traveling abroad to make the most of their visits to clients and potential clients abroad?
Try to get an agent that is local, and if you can hire him to not only to help you to sell, but to take you around, it will be a lot easier because they will protect you and they will know where the places are, and sometimes they get contacts. Sometimes you asking the embassies, they can even contact you with somebody that lives there and is looking for a job to sell American products, and that's how we end knocking doors and doing business.
Not to mention, usually locals know the best restaurant.
Oh, that's true.
Which is always
very important.
Which is always a very big plus.
Very good. I have a very specific question, and I've heard these from a lot of people that are doing business with companies in Mexico where the peso has been devaluating. How do you deal with distributors in other countries, let's say Mexico, where the peso, the local currency, has been devaluating, and they ask for discounts because now it's more expensive to buy your product? How do you deal with that? Do you have some sort of clause in the distribution agreement that talks about it? Or how do you deal with a situation like that in which a customer, a client, a distributor in another country is having issues with their currency weakening and come to you asking you for breaks in the prices?
Well, actually, it's a negotiation that you have to do since the beginning with them, and not only talking about price. At the beginning, I said that we don't sell products, we sell solutions, and the valuation is a problem. So we have to sell over that problem and find a way to use less materials so they can still do business with you, but because of you helping them, they do the business with you. So you have to find a way of being better on what you're doing and saving money. So this probably not saving money, but they will come out even.
I do want to actually elaborate a little bit because this has happened. Well, first of all, whenever you deal with situations like that, it's very much a case-by-case basis. Like Mr. Quiñones mentioned earlier, these are all things that are negotiated up front because we do build long-term relationships with our customers. Because we're a manufacturer, we have the ability to modify our product, and if cost is a factor for them, then there's that tool. The tool is that we can modify the product, change it to meet maybe not as high or as stringent specifications as what they currently use, but we can look for ways to save them money in the manufacturing process. If that's not something that's going to interest them, and maybe they're using the product that they need without any ability to change it, then there's other tools as well. You can always renegotiate payment terms. You can work with them on shipping costs by maybe having them allow you more floor space, so that way you can inventory more product on their plant floor, and that saves both of us money on shipping. So there's a way to do it. There's financial resources that you can play with, and of course, because we manufacture the product, there's technical options for us to modify the product as well. Sometimes it's a combination of all three.
As an advice, I suggest that negotiate in dollars if possible. That will protect your company here.
So Alberto, you bring up a good question, and certainly these are things that we've seen in the past. I'll give you an example. We have a customer in Chile who is a very large steel mill, and several years ago they had it wasn't a financial issue like what you brought up, but it was a weather problem where they had a hurricane hit, an earthquake, and they also had a tsunami that hit. And all of these things caused severe issues for their ability to manufacture their product. It damaged their plant extensively. And it caused a lot of problems, not just for the company, but for their community. And imagine workers not being able to get to work because the roads are destroyed or your equipment is completely unusable. So all of these things actually happen to a customer. And what Concord did is, of course, we reached out to them, and actually we were the very first ones and only ones to reach out to them as soon as we heard what had happened, and we offered whatever assistance we could provide in the way that would benefit them the most. And we discussed it with them, and we came up with a good idea. We said, well, we'll change our payment terms. We'll give you a more longer credit time to pay. We actually discounted the product for a temporary period until they could get back on their feet. 5% discount, which although might not sound a lot, you and I both know that in reality that's a very significant amount of money, and it was more than enough that to really help them where they needed it the most. And also looking at it from a strategic standpoint, Alberto, sometimes like in this situation, sometimes so that you do not lose the account and that you continue to foster goodwill with your customer, sometimes you have to not make a profit on that account. Sometimes you just have to sell to them at cost, so that way you don't lose the customer, and also you help them during a rough time, and you do that for them until they can get back on their feet, and they will appreciate you as a supplier so much more, because not only are you a supplier at that point, but you are part of the solution that helped that company get back in business. And they will appreciate that for forever.
Forever. Very well. Thank you very much for that insight. You have been tremendously gracious with your time, and I know that you all are very busy. You guys are getting ready to travel in a few days. And let's start wrapping up the interview. And I have just 2 more questions for you. Again, you have been traveling all over the world, visiting clients, potential clients, going to trade shows, you name it. Do you have any situation that made you think, boy, we are not in Kansas anymore. We are not in San Antonio anymore. A situation that made you realize how different is doing business in other countries?
Yes, I personally have had many, many moments. My first one, and although this might not go directly to what you're asking, I want to mention it because it is important. For many of your listeners here, there may come an opportunity or a day where they might feel a little bit overwhelmed, and that happened to me. Whenever I traveled early on working with my father, he took me to a very large steel mill in Mexico. And I would, you walk around, and I felt like I was in Mordor. There was fire coming out of the top of these blast furnaces at a steel mill. It was, they'll have to forgive me for this, but it was dirty, and it was all production all the time, 24 hours a day. It was a small city where everybody had a job and everybody had something to do, and all of these things were happening. And I was overwhelmed. I couldn't believe that all of this was happening. And it gave me a sense of how small a piece of the puzzle we as a supplier are. They were doing so many other things, and we provided them with their packaging material. Yes, it's important, of course, but it's such a small part of what they do. That was the time that I felt most. Now, traveling abroad, I had an opportunity one time to travel to South Africa to sell to a steel service center over there, and it first of all, I have to say it was beautiful. If you ever go to Johannesburg, go to Table Mountain. You will not regret it. It's beautiful. So we're there, and I had an opportunity to speak with them, and they speak a different language. It was Afrikaans, and which is a kind of a mix of some native language and Dutch. It's their own language there, and I had a chance to work with them. They were so very different. But whenever we got there, I'd never been across the pond. So for me, it was new and everything was so different. But once I got to the plant, once I was able to see their process, and I realized that we're all, although they were speaking a different language, we were all talking the same language of business. The problems that they had were the same problems we have, whether that's in business or in personal life. And once I found an opportunity to relate with them and to really get to know them as people, it was only after that I was able to get to know them as customers.
Now, there are listeners that are just beginning to export. What would be your words of encouragement to somebody that is just beginning to export?
Well, I'll let my father answer this, but I do think that it's important to first mention, remember always that the responsibility of knowledge is in you. It's important that you know the laws and the environment, and whether that's social environment or political environment or business environment, it's up to you as an entrepreneur and as a business person to first do your research, get with your team, and really get to know the landscape before you step out. It's supremely important. It will make a difference between success or failure. If your first order has issues getting across the border, your lead time isn't what you promised, maybe your price because of taxes isn't what you thought it would be, and maybe you're not competitive. So all of those things are supremely important before you go in. And before Mr. Quiñones elaborates further on the point, for me, one of the most important things is don't be afraid. Do not be afraid. Take the dive. Have confidence. Speak clearly. Be honest with yourself and with your customers. And of course, know your product. And those are all things that I think are just critical to a young or a burgeoning entrepreneur.
And that's the most important thing, what Vic just says, is know your product. You need to be confident on what you're selling. You know that what you got is worth it to take it. And don't be afraid of the people that you want to see. And if you're confident with what you're selling, you transmit that feeling to your customer. So that's very important. Yeah, one of the things that is important to take in consideration is that business is a game. It's like a football game. You're going to compete with the competitors. You're going to compete with other people. So it is important to have first the best employees, because the employees are the company, not the walls, not the machines. The employees are the company. Then after that, you have to make a good relationship with as well as the customers, with the suppliers. So this is a value chain. If you don't find the best avenue and the best people, you're not gonna succeed. Even if you have 90% of the people that is smart and they know what they're doing and they're great, if there's one or two people that they're not playing the game well, you're gonna lose, and the whole business is gonna lose. So you have to check well who you accept in your game, or even if you like him, you're gonna have to let him go and make a good team.
Victor, Vic, thank you very much to you, to the entire Quiñones family. Thank you very much for this interview. We know you are super busy. You are getting ready to travel soon, and it's truly a privilege to have you in our show. Thank you very much.
No, thank you, Alberto.
Alberto, thank you, and thank International Trade Center and all of your colleagues there for all of the outstanding work you do. We're very proud to be here with you and appreciative of your help. Thank you.
We want to thank Victor Quiñones and Vic Quiñones for this interview. We have included the links to Concord Supply's website and the resources mentioned in the interview in this episode's notes, which you can find on our website, exportlikeaboss.com. And don't forget to send us an email or tweet to let us know what you thought of this episode. Our email is podcast@exportlikeaboss.com, And our Twitter handle is @ExportLikeABoss. And if you haven't subscribed yet, subscribe today on iTunes. That's it for today. See you in a couple of weeks, and remember, the planet is your market. Export like a boss.
You've been listening to Export Like a Boss, the podcast for those on the front lines of international business and trade. For past episodes and more information, visit us at exportlikeaboss.com or subscribe on iTunes.